it's Lori with Behavior Education at Spirit Keeper Equine Sanctuary. Today is Friday, January 17th, 2020. Today you're going to get to see Captain Pike's third station training session. If you've already watched the two previous videos where he has been targeted onto a station for feeding, you will know that he was originally target trained, which means he was trained to follow a target out of his enclosure. Then I started building on that. I started to have him follow the target out of his enclosure, in this case onto a temporary station, to reduce handling stress. Now, Captain Pike is fairly good about handling, but just like many snakes, he's better about handling once he's already out of his enclosure than if I go into his enclosure and force him out. So what works really well for Captain Pike and many of our other snakes is to have them voluntarily shift out of their enclosure. And then if I'm going to handle them, it's usually quite easy to handle them once they're out. Unless it's an emergency, there's no reason for me to force the animal out. If they don't choose to come out, I'm not going to force them. So let's see how he does during session number 3, targeting to station. Now the first thing that we need to do is find the snake, and then we need to make sure that he's aware that we are here as the trainer. And then what we want to do is to make sure the learner sees the target. The learner recognizes that an activity is happening and that a session is going on. So I just see him, he has his tail way up here, his head is down there on the floor of his enclosure. I want to make sure that he sees me and knows I'm here. I want to make sure that he sees the target, that he is engaged with it. He starts to follow it right away. And I have his station kind of far away from his enclosure today. You really want to judge the correct distance to put the station, because you want the snake to have to completely 100% come out of the enclosure, but you don't want it so far away that they feel uncomfortable bridging that distance. And he's doing fantastic. I really expected no less of him since this is his third trial doing this. But I do want to make sure that 100% of his body comes out of that enclosure. Now I'm watching his body language very, very closely here, because you see that he's really coiling back and he's ready to eat. So I don't want to put the target so close to him that he strikes at it. But I want him to continue to engage with that target until all of his body's out of the enclosure. And right now he just has the tip of his tail hanging on, and as soon as he lets go with that, and I'm going to push him just a little further this week than I did before. Now he's 100% out of his enclosure, and most of his body except the very tip of his tail is on the station. I've really asked a lot of him, and he's just done fantastic. I'm going to go ahead now and present the food to him. And now he's free to take his time eating on the station. And I have it set on wheels so that I can move it out of my way if I want to in order to clean or do maintenance on his enclosure. Now the way that I have this temporary station set up is not exactly as a temporary holding bin. It's more of just a temporary holding station. There's holes in it on the top. There's 2 holes in it on the top, and there's a hole here on the side. And there's a hole on the front here. And so if he wants to climb inside of this, he can, and there's a tube inside for him to investigate, and then there's a perch on top. So this isn't set up to be a station that he goes inside and I put a lid on and he's completely contained and can't get out of. This is meant to be a station for him to eat on if he wants, or on days when I'm not feeding him, for him to come out on and climb around and in and keep himself physically and mentally engaged while I'm working on his enclosure. I do not expect that he would have any issue whatsoever shifting from his enclosure into a temporary holding bin that I could secure him in if needed. It's very important to me that all of my animals are used to voluntarily shifting out of their enclosure, being out of their enclosure on a temporary holding station or inside a temporary holding tub in case of emergency, or in case the animal needs to be transported for any reason, like to the veterinarian, or because of an emergency and we have to evacuate our home. If the animal's already used to being out of their enclosure, if they're already used to being in a tub, either for temporary holding purposes, to eat, or to explore and exercise, if I've got things in the tub for them to explore and exercise with, then their stress level is going to be much, much lower than an animal who we have to suddenly take to the vet, or we have to suddenly conduct an emergency evacuation of, that's never been out of their enclosure or never been in a temporary holding tub. I just want to make sure that the animal's stress level is as low as possible if unusual circumstances happen. And just to review what we did here, remember that the presentation of the target is the antecedent. The behavior is him following the target 100% onto the temporary holding station, and then the consequence is him getting a food reward. This is the third time that he's done this exercise. This is the quickest he's done the exercise. He's gotten faster about it each time, and he's just doing fantastic. I could not ask him to be doing any better with this exercise right now. And so what does the future of his training look like? Well, eventually it would be nice to present the station outside of his enclosure and have him automatically shift to it without the target. So way down the road, I'd like to start phasing out the target so that he just sees the station as a cue to shift out of his enclosure onto the station or into a temporary holding tub. But what I can do to get there is I can start making the shifting a little bit more difficult. In other words, I can start stretching him a little bit further and further each time. I might put it further to the left or further to the right, or I might put the station further away from him, or I might put it higher or lower, so that no matter where I present that target, he's following it to the station. In other words, I just changed the complexity of the exercise a little bit in his future in order to really solidify the fact that he's following that target to the station, and then somewhere down the road, hopefully he starts viewing the station itself as a cue to shift out of his enclosure. I'm checking back in with Captain Pike, see if he wants to voluntarily shift into it. Snakes typically don't shift back in as quickly as they learn to shift out. I would just say that if you're trying this with snakes, be patient, especially when you first start. The target training is not going to go very quickly. But as you could see, this was only Captain Pike's third session, and the speed at which he exited his enclosure this time was very quick compared to the first time. He knew exactly what he was doing. It didn't take long at all, and he did it perfectly. Shifting back in, it just took him a few minutes to decide that he wanted to go back in his enclosure, and that's fine as well. Not going to rush him. It's not an emergency. And I wouldn't start a session like this unless I had plenty of time to give him to shift out, to eat, and then to shift back in. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, everybody, love your animals and always remember to be kind.